Hello everyone, and happy Halloween week. If you're watching this video, it means it's Wednesday, and we spent Monday and Tuesday reading a version of Edgar Allan Poe's The Pit and the Pendulum. The Pit and the Pendulum was about a prisoner of war being held in a chamber during the Spanish Inquisition. I wanted to read a little nonfiction with you about a real true life prisoner of war. Everyone should have page 10 in our Happy Halloween packet open to John McCain, Prisoner of War, a first-person account. Let's make sure that we have those highlighters uncapped and ready to go. We'll be highlighting anything interesting or important you view in this first-person, true life, nonfiction, informational article. Heading down to the text. John McCain spent over 5 years in captivity as a POW, prisoner of war, in North Vietnam and wrote about it in May of 1973. John McCain spent 5.5 years in captivity as a POW in North Vietnam. His first-person account of this harrowing ordeal was published in U.S. News and World Report in May 14, 1973. Shot down in his Skyhawk dive bomber on October 26, 1967, Navy flyer John McCain was taken prisoner with fractures in his right leg and both arms. He received minimal care and was kept in wretched conditions that he describes vividly in this new U.S. News special report. Here in his own words, based on almost total recall, is Commander McCain's narrative of 5.5 years in the hands of the North Vietnamese. The date was October 26, 1967. I was on my 23rd mission, flying right over the heart of Hanoi in a dive at about 4,500 feet, when a Russian missile the size of a telephone pole came up. The sky was full of them and blew the right wing off my Skyhawk dive bomber. It went into an inverted, almost straight down spin. I pulled the ejection handle and was knocked unconscious by the force of the ejection. The airspeed was about 500 knots. I didn't realize it at the moment, but I had broken my right leg around the knee, my right arm in 3 places, and my left arm. I regained consciousness just before I landed by parachute in a lake right in the corner of Hanoi, one they called the Western Lake. My helmet and my oxygen mask had been blown off. I hit the water and sank to the bottom. I think the lake is about 15 feet deep, maybe 20. I kicked off the bottom. I did not feel any pain at the time and was able to rise to the surface. I took a breath of air and started sinking again. Of course, I was wearing 50 pounds at least of equipment and gear. I went down and managed to kick up to the surface once more. I couldn't understand why I couldn't use my right leg or my arm. I was in a dazed condition. I went up to the top again and sank back down. This time, I couldn't get back to the surface. I was wearing an inflatable life preserver type thing that looked like water rings. I reached down with my mouth and got the toggle between my teeth and inflated the preserver and finally floated to the top. Okay, so I'm going to come out of the text for a minute there at the end of paragraph 3. So John McCain is an American fighter pilot, and he has crash landed actually in enemy water. Paragraph 4 will begin with some North Vietnamese people coming out to get him from the water. And I want you guys to be thinking about how scary that would be to crash land on enemy territory. Make sure that you guys are keeping those highlighters going for anything that you see interesting or important. And we're going to head back to the text for paragraph 4. Some North Vietnamese swam out and pulled me to the side of the lake and immediately started stripping me, which is their standard procedure. Of course, this being in the center of town, a huge crowd of people gathered, and they were all hollering and screaming and cursing and spitting and kicking at me. When they had most of my clothes off, I felt a twinge in my right knee. I sat up and looked at it, and my right foot was resting next to my left knee, just in a 90-degree position. I said, "My God, my leg!" That seemed to enrage them. I don't know why. One of them slammed a rifle butt down on my shoulder and smashed it pretty bad. Another stuck a bayonet in my foot, which is like a sharp little knife at the end of a gun, rifle usually. The mob was really getting uptight. About this time, a guy came up and started yelling at the crowd to leave me alone. A woman came over and propped me up and held a cup of tea to my lips. And some photographers took some, go into the back of the page, pictures. This quieted the crowd down quite a bit. Pretty soon they put me on a stretcher, lifted it onto a truck, and took me to Hanoi's main prison. I was taken into a cell and put on the floor. I was still on the stretcher, dressed only in my skivvies with a blanket over me. For the next 3 or 4 days, I lapsed from conscious to unconsciousness. During this time, I was taken out to interrogation, which we called a quiz, several times. That's when I was hit with all sorts of war criminal charges. This started on the first day. I refused to give them anything except my name, rank, serial number, and date of birth. They beat me around a little bit. I was in such bad shape that when they hit me, it would knock me unconscious. They kept saying, "You will not receive any medical treatment until you talk." I didn't believe this. I thought that if I just held out, that they'd take me to the hospital. I was fed small amounts of food by the guard and also allowed to drink some water. I was able to hold the water down, but I kept vomiting the food. They wanted military rather than political information at this time. Every time they asked me something, I just give my name, rank, and serial number and date of birth. I think it was on the 4th day that 2 guards came in instead of 1. One of them pulled back the blanket to show the other guard my injury. I looked at my knee. It was about the size, shape, and color of a football. Ugh. I remembered that when I was a flying instructor, a fellow had ejected from his plane and broken his thigh. He had gone into shock. The blood had pooled in his leg and he died, which came as quite a surprise to us, a man dying of a broken leg. Then I realized that a very similar thing was happening to me. When I saw it, I said to the guard, "Okay, get the officer." An officer came in after a few minutes. It was the man that we came to know very well as the Bug. He was a psychotic torturer, one of the worst fiends that we had to deal with. I said, "Okay, I'll give you military information if you will take me to the hospital." He left and came back with a doctor, a guy that we called Zorba, who was completely incompetent. He squatted down, took my pulse. He did not speak English but shook his head and jabbered to the Bug. I asked, "Are you going to take me to the hospital?" The bug replied, "It's too late." I said, "If you take me to the hospital, I'll get well." Zorba took my pulse again and repeated, "It's too late." They got up and left. I lapsed into unconsciousness. Sometime later, the bug came rushing into the room shouting, "Your father is a big admiral. Now we take you to the hospital." I tell the story to make this point. There were hardly any amputees, meaning there were hardly any people who had like an arm or a leg cut off. There were hardly any amputees among the prisoners who came back because the North Vietnamese just would not give medical treatment to someone who was badly injured. They weren't going to waste their time. For one thing, in the transition from the kind of life we lead in America to the filth and dirt and infection, it would be very difficult for a guy to live anyway. In fact, my treatment in the hospital almost killed me. ... So there's more to that article, but I want you guys to just think about how you could compare and contrast John McCain's real life prison versus the prison and the torture chamber in the pit and the pendulum. How were these two experiences similar, and how were these two experiences dissimilar or unlike? We're going to be writing about that, those similarities and differences between the two passages at this point. So will everyone go ahead and cap those highlighters and grab your pens or pencils. I'm going to split the room in half for a jigsaw activity at this time. My inner you will write a sentence at the bottom of the page or two about how these two passages are similar, and my big outer you will begin a sentence with these two passages were different. So inner you, similarities, outer you, differences. Let's come back together as a whole class. Thanks, everyone.